Hello friends, welcome back to another video and a special hello if you are new. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 10 more books that I'm dying to reread. A few months ago I shared 10 books that I was dying to read, and some of those were some of my favorite books, and I feel like most of those focused more on classics. This is the list of, I think they are all, for the most part, pretty contemporary books that I want to reread, but I love rereading books. I think that there's something so special in visiting the stories that meant so much to us and that were impactful in our lives, and I think visiting them years later can have just as much of an impact, or potentially have a little bit of a different impact. And we're always changing, and I feel like our perspectives of those books years later could be different, and what we can take away from those books could be entirely different. And if anything else, it's just really fun to visit our favorite stories again. So these are 10 books that I really want to revisit. So let's get to it. All right, so first off, I'm going to start with a book that is part of a series. So that book is Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. I read this book, I think I might have read it as a child, but I don't remember for sure. But I read it multiple times as a young adult and as an adult, and I absolutely love this book. It tells the story of a young orphan named Anne. She is just a kindred spirit. She is charismatic and whimsy and full of wonder, and has a little bit of a temper, but she is a young orphan, and she is sent to Green Gables, where she believes she is going to be adopted by an elder brother and sister named the Cuthberts. They're older, and they actually wanted a boy to come help out on their farm, and Anne shows up, and they decide to kind of keep her and adopt her instead, and I feel like she just turns their world upside down. This is just one of the sweetest, just most wonderful books I've ever read. I just find so much of the quotes incredibly quotable and things that I want to say all the time in real life. I just, again, feel like Anne is a kindred spirit, and I love the thoughts and the ideas of finding the most random people that don't seem like they would be a kindred spirit to you, but finding out that they are. I think that's just really beautiful. And there's a quote in here, and it's like something like, "Dear world, you are very lovely, and I'm very lucky. You're very happy to be alive in you." And I love that quote, and I have it as part of my phone screen, because it's just an important reminder of how lucky we are to be here, and that the world can seem really awful at times, but really it's beautiful and lovely, and we're so lucky. But anyway, like I said, I have read Anne of Green Gables so many times, and then I've read the second book, which is Anne of Avonlea. But when I was shopping this summer, I found a box set of all of the books, and I think that they are just so pretty. I got it at half price for $15, but I think that it's just a really beautiful box set, and I've only read the first 2 Anne books because those were all I had, but now I have the whole box set. So I would love to. The first book is, I think, mostly Anne's coming of age, and then I know it goes on to her into adulthood and her into motherhood, and I think the last book or 2 are more, especially, I think I can tell because the pictures on the covers, they're not Anne obviously, but are about her children. But I just want to read Anne's story from start to finish, and in order to do that, I have to reread Anne of Green Gables, because I don't think I will ever despite probably enjoying the series as a whole, I don't think I will ever like any of them as much as I just like Anne's story. But yeah, I just want to start these because I want to read them kind of close together. So ideally, I think I will start these probably early next spring, and then read them through summer and fall. And I just think those are such Anne seasons, and I can't wait. I can't wait to have this reading experience. The next book that I have is by Markus, who is the author of The Book Thief, and it is Bridge of Clay. And I have a signed copy, which I didn't even realize that I had until I pulled it off of my shelf. but not the best signature, I would say. But this is set in Australia, I think primarily in Sydney. It tells the story of 5 brothers, and it opens up with their father coming home. So their mother has passed away, and their father, who they're referring to as the murderer, is coming home, and he's asking his 5 sons to build a bridge with him. All of the boys refuse to go with their father and to build this bridge with him, except the youngest boy, Clay. So anyway, basically they leave the city and Clay goes to work with his father on building this bridge, and he wants it to be beautiful and perfect. And so it flashes to Clay building this bridge with his father and Clay going home to his brothers, who are kind of casting him out because he decided to go with their father and to do this. And then Clay also has a friend named Carrie who wants to become a horse jockey. And then there are some flashbacks to Clay's mother's, I think it's her childhood and her early marriage with her father. This is just a really beautiful coming of age story. I read this book when it first came out, and I will say, from what I remember, it was very slow. And there were a couple times that I thought about putting it down and not picking it up. But honestly, I almost feel like I didn't have the maturity to grasp what was being done in this story at the time that I read it. But I do remember the ending, and I remember it being so impactful and just like almost like a punch to the gut. And it has stayed with me all of these years. And it's just one that I really want to I've always wanted to come back to even after I finished it, because I just want to see the story unfold all together and to see the events. And I just feel like being older and having different perspectives in the world, and again, just having a better understanding of it, could potentially make that ending even more I don't know the word I'm looking for, but just more really than what it was the first time around. So I really can't wait to read this one. I never see anybody talk about this book, so if you've read it, let me know. The next book that I have is a Sally Rooney book, and it is Conversations with Friends. This tells the story of 21-year-old Frances and her best friend Bobby. They basically meet this writer, or she's a journalist, yeah, named Melissa, and her husband Nick, and it just like swarms them into this lifestyle of parties and just a little bit more sophistication than what they as college students would have had. Frances and Nick have they grow kind of close and develop a little bit of a relationship, and it just really causes Frances to open up and to make sense of her emotions and her vulnerabilities for the first time in her life. I know that a lot of people don't like Sally Rooney. I feel like Sally Rooney is a writer who is for you, or she's not for you. I love her. I've never read anything by hers that I've been disappointed in. I've been blown away by everything. Her books have a lot of miscommunication, and honestly, her characters are not the best people, but I think that they're very realistic to actual humans. Like, everybody has their flaws. Everyone, if you were to, see their inner life and examine their flaws, you probably wouldn't like them. And I also just think we, in general, as humans, really suck at communicating with one another. And I just think that Sally Rooney portrays that really, really well. I bought this book and read it right after I read Normal People. And I read Normal People when the series had just come out. So I read it and then watched it. And I've reread Normal People a few times since then, but I've only read Conversations with Friends once. And I think it's really funny because I read this one and Normal People so close together. And I remember thinking that I liked Conversations with Friends more. But I just haven't ever picked it back up, and I don't know why. So I really want to. Also, this book has really amazing endometriosis representation. So if you are a woman who has endometriosis or has a friend who struggles with it, I feel like this just really puts into perspective how the disease affects you physically and mentally. And also, toward the beginning of the book, Frances isn't diagnosed, and it kind of shows the complications of getting that disease diagnosed as well. for me, when I read it, as soon as like it was talking about her symptoms, I was like, I bet she's got endometriosis, and it turned out she did. So it's a really good representation of that too, which is something, as someone who suffers with endometriosis, it's something that I really, really appreciate. The next book I don't own, unfortunately, but it is A Drinker of Ink by Shannon Castleton. This is a historical fiction book set in the 90s, and it follows a young woman named Vivian. She is I think she's a first generation immigrant. So her parents immigrated from France. She grew up in New York City, and now she is in California for school. When she was younger, her mom became very ill. I think it was breast cancer. And now she's in college. She's far away from her family in California, completely on the opposite side of the coast. And she has a lot of fear and anxiety that her mom is getting sick again, because she feels that her parents and her family are becoming very distant to her. All the while, she is falling in love with a graduate student who is helping out with one of her poetry classes. This is all told within her journals, and I think that it is so intimate to be reading her journals and her experiences. This book it sounds so simple, and I think sometimes the books that have the most simple plot lines can be the most impactful and life-changing, and this book was absolutely it. I just devoured it. It was all I've thought about. It's been a little over a year since I've read it, and I seriously think back to this book probably once a week. I read it, like I said, on my Kindle because it was on Kindle Unlimited, but I definitely want to own a physical copy, and I cannot wait to get a physical copy and to have it so I can go back through and underline and highlight and just relish the words so much more. But it is one of the most beautiful kind of coming of age love stories that I have ever read, and I highly recommend it. And I think having it set in the 90s was really impactful just with the communication. It wasn't like Vivian could just FaceTime her mom and physically see her. She had to try to call through a dorm phone, and sometimes she didn't have access to that phone, and sometimes she couldn't get a hold of her parents. And then, she's worried about, and I also think as I'm gonna really get into my spiel, but I also think as like an eldest daughter, I think that you will feel this so much, just that desire to have this life for yourself, but also to have that pressure put on you to feel like you need to be there to take care of your family. It's so good, and I just highly recommend that you read it. The next book that I have is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I don't know how you would properly pronounce that. This tells the story of Eleanor. She is neurodivergent, I believe. I don't know if it explicitly states that, so if I am wrong, I'm sorry. But basically, she has really horrible social skills, and she can't interact with people without just being blunt to the point where it comes across rude. She leads a very structured, very rigid lifestyle, and eventually she bumps into an IT guy named Raymond who works within her office, and he kind of just derails her life in many ways. It kind of forces her out of those structures, which, and due to some other like extenuating circumstances in Eleanor's life, it just kind of causes this like snowball effect. I think that this was honestly one of the most well-written stories that I've ever read. I just fell in love with Eleanor. I think that she's such a great heroine, and I think that just the discussion of opening things up and allowing new circumstances and new people into your life, I just think that message can be really, really beautiful. I also think the writing style was really humorous, and I think it balanced the heavy things out with it as well. I don't remember a ton of detail, and I didn't want to look up a whole lot about this one when I was deciding to include it in this video, just because when I do reread it, I love going into books blind. So not remembering a lot or not having a lot of details will kind of help it feel like, almost like a first time experience again. All right, the next book that I have is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I adore Emily Henry. I've talked about her before in videos. My sweater stuck on my watch. That's why I'm like shaking my arm. And I read this one when it first came out and loved it. I would still say that my favorite book by Emily Henry is always going to be Beach Read, because nothing will ever compete with Augustus Everett in my head. Like, he's number one forever. But if I had to pick a number two, I believe that it would be Funny Story. This tells the story of Miles and Daphne. Basically, they were dating two people named Peter and Petra. So Peter and Petra were childhood friends, and basically they decide that they were in love with each other, and they dump Miles and Daphne, who are forced to kind of move in together and just replan their lives since their exes are now dating. Peter and Petra decide to call and invite Miles and Daphne to their wedding. When kind of in like this fit of rage, Daphne tells Peter that she's now dating Miles, and that will be her date to his wedding. So they kind of launch this like fake dating thing to convince them that they're actually together, whereas they actually start to fall in love with each other. I just think that this was so witty. It was so fun. It has close proximity. I love fake dating. I love Miles. I've seen so many people compare Miles to Nick from New Girl, and I don't get it, because don't get me wrong, I like Nick from New Girl, and I think him and Jess are perfect, but like, I feel like Miles has way more ambition than Nick from New Girl, and I just don't like that comparison. But I love Miles and Daphne is a children's librarian, and I just think in another world, Casey is a children's librarian. It just didn't happen in this life, you know? Instead, I work with kids in literacy, but just not in that way. But I don't know. I really love it. And Daphne is just a character after my own heart. So I just really want to revisit their story. This was one of those books that as soon as I closed it, I wanted to open it back up and start it right back over. All right, the next book that I have is A Gentleman in Moscow. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name because I can't remember how to, and I'll butcher it. But this starts in 1922, where Count Alexander Rostov is deemed an aristocrat, and he is by the Bolsheviks, and he is sentenced to life to live in the Metropole Hotel in Russia. So he cannot leave the hotel. As soon as he leaves, he would be executed. So Alexander is forced to live out his days in this hotel, and he witnesses so many fascinating events in history, but he just has to watch them all from like the windows or hear about them from people who can go out into Russia, whereas he can't. It's very, very fascinating. And over the years, he really starts to lose a passion for living. Until one day a young girl comes into the hotel who somehow falls into Alexander's hands, and he kind of has to figure out a way to give her the life that she deserves, and it kind of gives him a purpose for his life again. This book is just really beautiful. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It is so poignant. It is so human. It's very character driven. Even though there are a lot of big plot events happening, but it is mostly character driven, and I would say that it's cozy. My husband and I watched the miniseries with Ian McEwan, and it's amazing as well. But he would not categorize this as cozy, but I would. I think that it's cozy and comforting, and I love it. And this, again, was a book that as soon as I finished it, I just wanted to go right back to it, and I can't wait to. I can't wait to go back to it. The next book I mentioned in my fall reading recommendations, so I'm not going to go on about this one too much, but it is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Fredrik Backman. This tells the story of a young girl named Elsa. She is 7 years old, and her grandmother is her best friend. They have lots of adventures together. It incorporates a lot of like fairy tales and magic kingdoms and you know, all of these just adventures and experiences that her grandmother kind of creates for her. When her grandmother dies, Elsa is heartbroken because she has not only lost her grandmother, but she's lost her best friend. What are you doing back there, huh? But her grandmother leaves her behind a box full of letters. And in these box of letters, she has one for every single person that her grandmother has ever wronged. So Elsa has to go on this last kind of adventure for her grandmother, delivering those letters to the people that her grandmother has wronged. This was just the most whimsy, fun, human, heartbreaking story when I read it. This was the very first Fredrik Backman book that I read, and it was years and years and years ago. And this just solidified to me him as one of my favorite writers. And I think I have picked up every single book or pre-ordered every single book that he had released after this one. I just fell in love with his writing and his ability to tell stories through characters. I just can't wait to kind of come back one day to where it all started and reread the story. The next book is Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. This is the story of a young girl named Annie. She lives in a imaginary city called Rome, Kentucky, which I wish was real. I'm from Kentucky, so I would move to Rome. And she runs a flower shop, which is the dream. But basically, Annie is in this place where she is ready to get married. She's ready to have a family. And if you grew up in a small town, you know how impossible that can seem, because everybody knows you. Everyone knows every embarrassing thing that has ever happened to you. And everyone's really protective over Annie. So if they see her out with a man, they're going to interfere, whether it's good intentioned or bad intentioned. So Annie goes on a date, and her date pretty much says that hang on, I think there's a quote on the back. So unbelievably boring. Annie thinks that, oh, okay, there's clearly a problem here. I've got to figure out how to flirt. I've got to figure out how to, to do this, or I'm going to be alone forever. So she decides to have Will Griffin tutor her, which is a bodyguard. And it's an interconnected standalone. So if you would have read the first one, then you would know who Will is. But anyway, so Will decides to help Annie find the love of her life. And of course, they fall in love. It is so cute and sweet. And I don't know, I feel like this book probably isn't for everybody. But I think if you are shy, I think that if you have some social anxiety, I think that if you know what it's like to feel insecure and to feel alone, or to not feel like you can be good enough at times, then I think that you would really like this one. I just think that it's so sweet. I've read all of the Rome, Kentucky books by Sarah Adams, but this one has remained my favorite. I would love to come back and visit it one day. And these are all loosely based off of Audrey Hepburn movies, and this one is loosely based off of Funny Face, which is one of my favorite Audrey Hepburn movies, so it just kind of goes hand in hand. And last but not least, I have The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. If you've read The Song of Achilles, you're probably thinking, what the heck is wrong with you? Why do you want to read this again? And I would say it's probably been close to 10 years since I've read this book. And I think I'm ready to get hurt again. I think I'm ready. I think I can handle it. Maybe I can't handle it, but I think I want to reread it. I want to revisit the story. But anyway, The Song of Achilles tells the story of Achilles and Patroclus. I'm probably mispronouncing those names. I'm sorry. But they are from Greek mythology. I feel like everyone kind of knows the story. Basically, they meet as children and they form a really tender relationship, a really beautiful bond with one another. When Achilles is called to fulfill his destiny when Helen of Sparta has been kidnapped. So he goes to Troy, and obviously we kind of know what happens there, but Patroclus follows, and it kind of just, you can kind of piece it together from there. But I think that this is one of the most beautifully written love stories. I think that it is incredibly done. This is the first any type of mythological, or honestly probably any type of retelling that I had ever read. So whether it was like a fairy tale retelling or a mythological retelling, this is the first one that I'd ever read. And I think the reason I picked it up was because I saw like a thing on Pinterest that was like the aesthetic of it, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. Little did I know what I was going to be getting myself into. But I think that it is just a really beautiful story. And again, it's been ages since I've read it, and I want to go back into it. I want to read their love story again. So I keep saying I will pick it up soon, and then I put it off because I know it's gonna be a doozy, but hopefully eventually. All right, friends, thank you so much for being here and listening to me babble on about books. Let me know any books that you love to reread or that you hope to reread, because I'm always looking for more books to add to my list. But yeah, thank you again so much for your time, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye.